Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard Caesar 924 coming at you with another video for you guys today. So this is going to be my pay-per-view review for Survivor Series 2018. And overall I gotta say I really enjoyed this show. Now I wouldn't necessarily say that this was the greatest show of all time, but for the most part this was actually a pretty solid show and basically enough for me to keep myself entertained. Now, there were a couple of marquee matches that were originally scheduled to take part in this pay per view event, but due to some unfortunate circumstances behind the scenes, so there were a couple of bait and switches that occurred a little bit into the show. Obviously, we did have Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey being a notable example of this, and due to what happened on the Go Home Raw leading the Survivor Series, where Nia Jax accidentally knocked out Becky Lynch and bloodied her due to the injury that was sustained by Nia Jax. So therefore, Becky Lynch was unable to compete at this very event. And what they did on SmackDown was do a promo in which Becky Lynch would have to appoint her substitute to take part in the bragging rights match against Ronda Rousey, and so Becky went with Charlotte. So instead, we did get Charlotte versus Ronda Rousey instead, a match that had been in the works for a couple years now. Finally, it's ended up happening. We also had Brock Lesnar and AJ Styles, which was also a match that was going to be scheduled for this event. But after what happened on the Go Home SmackDown, in which Daniel Bryan beat AJ Styles to win the WWE title, so instead, we got Brock versus Daniel Bryan. So much like last year, we also have another bait and switch as far as the marquee matches that were presented on this particular event. The Survivor Series, ever since they brought back the brand extension, it's like all they've been doing is just bragging rights after bragging rights after bragging rights, Raw versus SmackDown, champion versus champion, the Raw tag division versus the SmackDown tag division. I mean, it was cool. Like maybe the first time or second time that you've done it, but after that, it's like, how come they just don't seem to like change things up every once in a while? Why does it always have to be Raw versus SmackDown? Why can't we just have like individual Raw versus Raw or SmackDown versus SmackDown kind of matches like we did during the initial brand split? I just don't understand why Survivor Series has to be the way it is. I mean, I don't necessarily mind the bragging rights concept in itself, but I was already discussing about this in my previous video when I was talking about Survivor Series 2002 about how they managed to do their elimination match. Even in the past Survivor Series as well, with the Deadly Games tournament, where it was like singles elimination. Basically, I might as well just discuss about some of the matches featured on this particular card. And normally I don't really talk about the pre-show matches, but I might as well make this a bit of an exception since what they do with Survivor Series when it comes to Raw versus SmackDown is that they come up with a actual points system to determine which particular team or which particular wrestler from this one brand, like for instance, with SmackDown versus Raw, with the SmackDown's tag team division versus the entire Raw tag team division. SmackDown's tag team division went over the Raw's tag team division. And even despite that on the pre show, unfortunately, that would be discarded from the continuity, how have you, when Steph McMahon cut a promo about how Raw clean sweep SmackDown and that SmackDown didn't get any points, they didn't have an actual winner, which is total BS. Not counting the pre-show and just completely obliterating their entire tag team division. It's just a really sad reality. I'm not gonna go through like the elimination after eliminations. A lot of that can be confusing, but the match that opened up the main card was Team Raw's versus Team SmackDown as far as the women's division is concerned. So from Raw, you had Mickie James, Nia Jax, Tamina, Bayley, and Sasha Banks. Over on Smackdown, you had Naomi, Carmella, Sonya Deville, Asuka, and Mandy Rose. Now, I mean, this match was actually pretty good. Nia Jax did get a lot of heat after what happened with the incident between her and Becky Lynch on the Go Home Raw. So Nia Jax basically got booed out of the building and in the building the instant that she made her entrance and her way into the ring. Nia would embrace the controversy by dubbing herself as the face breaker and using kind of like that heat to the fullest. Raw would eventually go over SmackDown with Nia Jax being the sole survivor. Basically a pretty good match. Carmella's babyface run is starting to really grow on me, even though I was kind of very iffy about it. Naomi's kind of there. It's just unfortunate that she hasn't really been back on top for a while, even though she had a pretty solid reign as the SmackDown Women's Champion last year. But now she's just kind of a side attraction. Even Bayley and Sasha Banks. I mean, I have no idea what the hell they were doing with these two. It's like they were having this disintegration that was going on throughout the summer. Bayley turned on Sasha Banks, or so we thought, and then they decided to kind of give them counseling, and now they just basically put them back together, and now they're just not doing anything with them other than feuding with the Riot Squad. Mickie James's run in WWE in recent years is just kind of there as well, just a lackey for Alexa Bliss for the longest time. Bring back some of the momentum that she had during her initial WWE run, whereas now she's just kind of like a joke, really. So Nia Jax, I mean, I'm not like the biggest fan of her. They've been turning her face and heel left and right, and now they're making her all the way heel, and her partnership with Tamina also. So there's some solid chemistry between those two. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not necessarily too crazy about Nia, but hopefully they'll do some kind of program between her and Becky Lynch when she comes back. So that'll also be something to definitely look forward to. And then we also have the mid-card title brand versus brand match over on Raw. Seth Rollins, who's the Intercontinental Champion, taking on SmackDown's United States Champion, Shinsuke Nakamura. Now, this was basically, like a pretty good match. Now, the Raws leading into Survivor Series, we all know what happened when Dean Ambrose did the unthinkable, even despite months of teasing, as far as their on and off disintegration going on within the Shield, particularly with Dean and Seth. But even despite the fact that Dean and Seth would go on to win the tag team titles, so Dean out of nowhere attacks Seth Rollins, hits him with the dirty deeds, and then basically this was coming off the heels of the unfortunate news of Roman Reigns being diagnosed with leukemia, having to sideline him for a few years. So they basically kind of played it off as far as Dean's hatred towards Seth and how Dean's felt like he's the weak link of the Shield, and basically kind of taking his frustrations on Seth. But even despite all that, so Seth also has to deal with the Survivor Series and dealing, having to put pressure as Intercontinental Champion. So he's taking on Shinsuke Nakamura. It's a pretty good match, I will say. Seth would go on to beat Shinsuke in that match. I thought for sure that Dean Ambrose was going to interfere and just cost Seth Rollins the match and allow Shinsuke the victory, but surprisingly Seth beat Shinsuke without any interference whatsoever. So that was just kind of, I wouldn't say weird, but you would think that because this is a pay-per-view that this would also be used as a way to set up storylines for the next pay-per-view. And this was just basically a match that was just, like I said, just basically bragging rights, and Seth did go on to beat Shinsuke, and there was actually some pretty cool stuff that they did, especially towards the end where Shinsuke tried to go for his finisher, but Seth moved out of the way. He bounces off the ropes, hits him with the curb stomp to beat Shinsuke and to earn a point for Monday Night Raw. So there's some pretty cool stuff there. It'll be interesting to see where Seth and Dean will go from there when Seth will defend the Intercontinental title against Dean Ambrose at TLC. All right, so the next match we have is the Interbrand Tag Team match between the Raw Tag Team Champions, the Authors of Pain, taking on Sheamus and Cesaro over on SmackDown. I mean, this match was a pretty decent match. Wasn't given a lot of time. Unfortunately, the match did get overshadowed by the hijacking of Enzo Amore, and basically earlier this year he was fired from the WWE. This was just not too long after he was promoting his rap album, and so he was in the crowd and just basically gaining some attention to the fans and doing his signature catchphrases. And the security eventually escorted him off the arena. I mean, I don't really have any thoughts about Enzo. I mean, I was never like the hugest fan per se. The match itself was okay for what it was, and how just fans just kind of turned away from it, and it's. I mean, I just don't care for Enzo Amore. I mean, I never really thought that he was like going to be like a main eventer or anything like that. In the meantime, Authors of Pain, who were just coming from NXT over to Monday Night Raw some months ago, so they've been proving their dominance. There was also a little incident where Drake Maverick, who had been the general manager of 205 Live, who would serve as the manager for the Authors of Pain in replacing Paul Elrig. He ended up pissing his pants. Big Show had been aligning with Sheamus and Cesaro ever since SmackDown 1000. And so he basically threatened Drake Maverick, and he ended up pissing his pants, literally. The match eventually ended with the Authors of Pain going over the bar in that match. Then we also have Buddy Murphy versus Mustafa Ali, which unfortunately a match that I wish I could really go into, but I haven't really followed a whole lot of 205 Live recently. Buddy Murphy did defeat Mustafa Ali to retain the Cruiserweight title. Now we get to our men's Survivor Series elimination match. Over on Monday Night Raw, we have Dolph Ziggler, Drew McIntyre, Braun Strowman, Finn Balor, and Bobby Lashley taking on SmackDown's The Miz, Shane McMahon, Rey Mysterio, Samoa Joe, and Jeff Hardy. Now, I actually thought this was actually a pretty solid match. I mean, it's great to see, Rey Mysterio back in the WWE again, back on the SmackDown brand where he made his mark on that show. There were some pretty cool spots here during this match where Shane McMahon did that signature elbow drop that he normally does on the Braun Strowman through the announce table. So, with Shane McMahon, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the whole idea of him being the best in the world, because he was in Crown Jewel, which was a house show that I did not watch, but I heard the news about what happened during that tournament where he just kind of self-insert himself in the tournament, won in the process, even despite not even qualifying in the first round. It was just one of those weird ideas where I'm like, why did they even do this? I know I'm kind of getting a little off subject about, Shane McMahon as far as what happened in recent months and all the controversy surrounding about that pay-per-view. I did rewatch the match on the WWE Network, so I'm trying my best to try and recollect everything that happened, or a lot of like notable stuff. It was Braun and Baron Corbin. They were like arguing, and the catch is that Braun couldn't lay his hands on Baron Corbin, who at this point is the current Raw general manager after Stephanie McMahon fired Kurt Angle. So Baron Corbin has taken over the helm as the general manager for Monday Night Raw. Braun and Baron have been kind of going back and forth in terms of some heated arguments leading this show until Raw manages to beat SmackDown. Then Braun would be able to get his hands on Baron Corbin, pardon the pun. So they had to put their differences aside to take on SmackDown, and Raw basically decimates SmackDown here. Braun Strowman would go on to have the most eliminations in this match. A pretty good match overall, but Raw went over SmackDown. So there you go at that. So Raw basically decimates SmackDown. And then after the match, Baron Corbin attacked Braun Strowman, much to the chagrin of Braun. So then he eventually went after him. So they're basically setting up Braun versus Baron for TLC, but recently there was reports of Braun suffering an arm injury, so therefore he will be unable to compete at that pay-per-view. I mean, it's just really a shame with all these injuries, and even with Dolph Ziggler also getting injured recently as well. So WWE's really have to consider or trimming down their house shows. I mean, a lot of wrestlers are just getting injured left and right. And with Samoa Joe, I mean, he's also getting injured pretty constantly. I mean, I know he recently returned after a brief injury. It's just so crazy just to see so many guys get hurt. And I know people say accidents happen and injuries happen on occasions as well. But it just feels more and more frequent as far as the injuries are concerned. So they WWE's really have to consider maybe doing something about it in order to kind of reduce the chances some of their top tier wrestlers from getting injured. Therefore, in turn, plans change at the last moment, wrestlers getting replaced. It's just crazy just to think so many wrestlers getting hurt. Then we have Ronda Rousey taking on Charlotte in the women's interbrand match. Now, this is actually a really great match, and it was given a pretty reasonable amount of time, almost 15 minutes. Originally, this was supposed to be Becky versus Ronda, so because of Becky's injury, so they replaced Charlotte to take over Becky's spot. And so they have the match, and it started off a lot of pretty much a hard-fought bout, and a lot of near falls here and there. Ronda and Charlotte trying to wear each other down with submission holds. Charlotte doing the figure eight, and Ronda Rousey trying to lock in the arm bar. So there was just a lot of cool stuff that they were doing. And then the ending, I think the ending was likely the most memorable moment of the match, and something I didn't expect for them to finish off the match. And Charlotte eventually goes off the deep end. She attacks Ronda Rousey with a series of kendo sticks. And this is basically after given the feeling that Charlotte's just having this hard time trying to wear down Ronda in a fair wrestling match. They've been actually kind of been building tension on SmackDown the past several weeks leading this show. And then Survivor Series, Charlotte just snaps. She goes on the deep end. She attacks Ronda with the kendo sticks. And the referees are all coming out there to stop Charlotte. But Charlotte refuses, so she attacks Ronda some more. She leaves the ring. She comes back, attacks her additionally, signifying a heel turn, or at least what it seemed to be a heel turn, even, despite the fact that Ronda and Charlotte are on different brands. Yeah, so, I mean, I thought this was a great match, and even a pretty interesting moment at the end where Charlotte just finally has it, and she just came off the deep end, like I said. It's basically a heel turn that fans have been warranting for a couple months. Finally, it becomes a reality. I really wish that hopefully that they will do Becky versus Ronda when Becky comes back, and maybe do a match between those two on a big scale. I mean, it would just suck if Becky never really had that chance to have that match with Ronda Rousey that was just taken away from her. Yeah, hopefully maybe they'll do something where, once Becky returns, they'll probably insert her into this rivalry with Charlotte also factoring in the equation. Maybe a three-way match somewhere down the road. I don't know. It's just be interesting to see how this all plays out. Definitely looking forward to that. And then we have our main event, which is Brock Lesnar taking on Daniel Bryan. Now, originally this was going to be the rematch from last year with Brock Lesnar taking on AJ Styles. But as I already discussed on the Go Home Smackdown, Daniel Bryan defeated AJ Styles to become the WWE Champion under some dubious circumstances, which Bryan low-blowed AJ Styles and hits him with the knee in order to become the WWE Champion. And then Bryan just basically showing his true colors, beating up AJ Styles some more, cementing his heel turn. I don't know if that seems to be any coincidence that Charlotte and Bryan just seem to turn heel around the same time, and both the wrestlers were kind of inserted in this match into their respective matches at the last moment. Yeah, so this actually was a match that I know a lot of people have been waiting to see for a couple years now. I mean, at WrestleMania 31, a lot of people wanted Bryan to win the Royal Rumble and face Brock Lesnar for the WWE title, because this was like before they reinstated the brand split. Going back to SummerSlam 2014, had Bryan not gotten hurt, that we would have likely have seen a match with Brock, and he would have decimated Daniel Bryan, sort of like what we saw at this particular pay-per-view with Survivor Series. It was surprisingly a really great match. Brock got a lot of offense on Daniel Bryan at the beginning. Bryan eventually picked back up at some point during the match, and the commentators actually put it over just in shock and awe. It's like they just feel very sympathetic over the amount of beatings that Bryan had been receiving. It just felt like really bad timing the more I start to think about, even watching this match again, and just how, turning Bryan heel at this time just really felt like maybe they could have postponed his heel turn down the road. I mean, the Bryan heel turn in itself was fine, but I just think it might have been a bit of wrong timing just to do it before the match that he had with Brock Lesnar, and basically just coming off very sympathetic and getting his ass beat. So Lesnar was basically dominant. Bryan did, however, get some offense, and even got to a point where Bryan locked in the yes lock on Brock Lesnar and coming so close to making him submit, but because he's Brock Lesnar, rarely does he ever even submit or tap out. So Lesnar did, however, defeat Daniel Bryan despite Bryan's efforts, hits him with the F5 for the 3 count in order to win the match. Raw wins it, and basically that's how the show ends right there. So that's really my thoughts on Survivor Series 2018. I mean, Raw just basically beat Smackdown by a landslide. I know Stephanie McMahon did a promo to Raw after Survivor Series where she said that SmackDown didn't even win once, which is total bullcrap. SmackDown's tag team division beat Raw's tag team division on the pre-show, but yet they don't even count that, so that just completely just really shows just how misleading the event was, especially when it came to the point system. I mean, this pay-per-view, like I said, it was a pretty solid show. It wasn't the greatest around. Some pretty cool stuff here. The Ronda-Charlotte match was pretty good. Rollins versus Shinsuke was pretty good as well. Brock versus Bryan exceeded my expectations. I thought Bryan wasn't going to make it out. People had some concerns over whether Daniel Bryan would be healthy enough to fight against a stiff opponent like Brock Lesnar. I mean, there's just been, over the years, like especially with Bryan's neck problems, that we would never see a Bryan versus Brock match. Turns out we ended up getting that. But yeah, I mean, this show was just a pretty solid show overall. Thank you all guys for watching. Let me know what's some of your favorite matches on this particular card here. And this is the Gold Standard User 924 signing out.